Hello everyone, James Williams, Director of Programs with MEF here, and a very warm welcome to MEF Connect's Business Messaging. Plenty for us to look through in the next few days, but kicking us off, giving us some real facts and figures as to what's going on in the world of business messaging now is Mr. Nick Lane, who is the founder and principal industry analyst with Mobilesquared. Nick, welcome and great to have you on the show.
Good morning. Hi, James. How you doing?
Hi, fantastic. So that's your introduction, sir. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks, Meth. It's a packed program, and it's great to be able to share our views. Typically, what we would be doing is sharing our forecast, but as you can read, we're actually in the middle of updating our business messaging forecast across every channel. And as a result of that, and because of the impact of 2020, there's some quite drastic changes. So I can give you a quick insight into what we've seen from our research. And so far, we've spoken to about well over 100 companies. If we haven't spoken to you already, please get in touch. We need to get as many views as possible so we have a rounded view of where the industry is and where it's going. So we would appreciate that. So firstly, I'll just look at where we thought the market would be worth prior to the pandemic. So our view for 2020 as of when we released our forecast in 2019 was that the A2P SMS market would be worth just under $18 billion. What we're seeing is some enormous growth taking place, and that growth is really coming from the fact that businesses are turning to SMS in this kind of period of crisis as a way of getting the most reliable way of accessing their customers and potential customers. A massive drive in that is obviously in terms of one-time passwords, 2FA, and also notifications. A number of sectors have been hit hard. Other sectors have really kind of flourished in this environment. But what we're really seeing now is that growth is going to be 20% or 30%, or between those two, higher than we were originally forecasting. So what does that mean? In the blue, it shows our original forecast for 2018 through to 2020. And now you've got a 2020A and 2020B. So the yellow basically shows a 20% growth year on year, 30%. The red kind of shows 30% growth. And why we've got that going through into 2021 is because, again, the research and the data we're getting now suggests that the trend that really kind of kick-started in the second half of last year is being maintained throughout 2021. So what that means is, in theory, based on the 20 to 30% growth, A2P SMS was worth somewhere between $21.5 billion and $25.8 billion. At a 30% growth, then the market could be worth around $23.3 billion in 2020, and it could grow to around $30 billion in 2021. So why is this important? Well, I think this is important for a number of reasons. First, it shows that actually, whereas we're expecting brands to increase their spend by about $1.2 billion, in fact, they've increased their spend by $5 billion or maybe even more. So they've turned to messaging. Messaging has become the go-to channel, and we kind of think this is a very kind of key moment in the world of messaging. And the reason we say this is we haven't, but lots of people would say, oh, because P2P SMS has been dying, because of OTTs, the fate will be something similar for A2P SMS, and it'll stop growing, but it isn't. It's great. It's growing faster now than it's ever growing. So I'm sorry, but here's a cliche. Are we actually at the tip of the iceberg in terms of the business messaging opportunity? So I think there are three key indicators that suggest that maybe we need to start changing our mindset in terms of the opportunity that lies ahead for business messaging. First thing is looking at business usage. So we've been looking at our data and applying the average messages sent per month by micro, small, medium, and large companies. Now, what you can see on the page now in red is the number of businesses actually using A2P SMS based on this extrapolation. And there's no rocket science behind it. We've just been extrapolating numbers based on our traffic figures and revenue, and this is what we're left with. So you can't really see anything. In actual fact, there's about 300 million registered companies around the world. So if we actually kind of blow this up a little bit and give you some insight into where we are with this, it actually shows that about 2.23% of businesses are using A2P SMS right now. Now, that's about 6.7 million businesses. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, we've got 100,000 customers, we've got 100,000 customers, and that's actually, I'm not saying you haven't, but what we're saying is actually, regardless of how many customers you actually have, no matter how you think about it, and even if the margin of error in these calculations is wrong, and let's say 10% of businesses are using SMS, ultimately 90% of businesses are not using A2P SMS. So the potential there for organic growth is absolutely ginormous. And what you can see on the slide here is that the green shows where we are today, based on spend around that 21.5 billion figure, based on this 2.23% of businesses. Now, if we just assume that 5% of each business segment uses A2P SMS, then that spend will automatically grow to 75 billion. And if that grows to 10%, that spend becomes 150 billion. So in actual fact, when you start to look at it in those terms, you kind of think, well, actually, we've hardly even started this journey. And the opportunity hasn't even really begun. So as you can see, just by going to this 5% figure, there's an uplift of 244% in spend, and nearly 600% when it goes to 10%. So the second thing to look about is then looking at business messaging users. So here we are. These are our Feb 21 numbers. As you can see, we look at unique mobile users. So we believe that there's 5.16 billion unique mobile users out there on a mobile device. Therefore, they've got messaging. Therefore, they are a potential SMS business messaging user. So as you can see, they far outstrip anyone else. But then if you look at the rest of everyone else, you can see here that the potential for RCS users is still already at about just over 2 billion. And you can see that actually, in actual fact, from here, everything is going up. And to show you just by how much, this shows the reach for each channel as a percentage of unique mobile users. So obviously SMS will be 100%. The potential RCS is a bit of a curveball, really, given it's just really showing what could be achieved right now. We believe it's around about 16.7%. But again, as I said, we are updating all of our numbers. So these numbers, some of these numbers will change. WhatsApp won't change. Well, it might change because it's got new numbers. But it's about 43%. And you can see the other figures here. Telegram, which is obviously in the news at the moment because it is experiencing strong growth, has about 13.4% penetration. So if we then look at, this is annual growth, it's Feb 2020 to 2021, it's not daily growth, just to make that clear. So you can see, for example, Telegram here has grown by almost 90% in the last 12 months. Obviously, most of that growth has come in the last couple of months. In terms of RCS users, that's grown at 150%. So it's coming from a smaller base, but it's still enjoying big growth. WhatsApp continues to grow, that's about 13%. An iPhone and potential ABC users is about 12.6%. Now, what I want to do, and something Dario touched with in the introduction, is to really just look at this in context. So globally, there's about 3.5 billion unique smartphone users. Now, the majority of those actually use messaging apps. So let's say there's about 3.3 billion rich messaging users. Put that into context in terms of looking at other channels. Mobile internet users, 4.2 billion. Mobile social media, close to 4 billion. Households that use it with a TV is about 1.6 billion. So when you kind of think about the size of the potential channel, rich messaging is almost as big as the social medias, the internet. It really is going to become the next big channel for brands to communicate with their customers. So let's look at revenue growth, and again, trying to put some perspective into things in terms of where we are and where we think these things are going. So this is A2P SMS growth. You can see really around the 2010, 2011 time, this is where revenues really started to kick in as the kind of next gen firewalls really started to kind of tackle the grey root problem and convert the world from grey to white. And obviously what we're now showing is the massive growth that the industry is enjoying, because obviously the rather tragic events happening around the world right now because of lockdown, etc. But as you can see, there's big growth there. And this shows the users. That's where we are in terms of A2P SMS. If you look at WhatsApp, and I think this is where things start to get interesting. WhatsApp has been around for 9 years before it started to even try to start monetizing its user base, at which point it had around 1.7 billion users. So again, we think spend last year was up to just over 100 million on WhatsApp business. But again, it shows that in actual fact, there was a long delay between the launch, getting a strong user base, and monetizing it. So now if you look at what's happening in RCS. So the first RCS deployment or joint deployment was in 2012. As an industry, we tried to start monetizing it at the same time as WhatsApp with WhatsApp Business, but it's only a 6-year gap, at which point there were only, you can see, about 160 million RCS users. So we tried to monetize at a very early point, given that the reach probably wasn't there yet. What you can see that there is some growth in spend, but not very much. But the point is really highlighted in the next couple of slides. Monetization on channels can be achieved. So obviously this is Facebook revenues. Between when it launched in 2004, when it started monetizing the channel in 2008, and to the present time, in terms of 2020, where it's making around 86 billion, and it has an ARPU of around $30 per user. So then what we need to do then is look at what does this mean in relation to the other channels. As you can see, so for the first couple of years, Facebook already had a very strong ARPU. If you look at SMS and A2P SMS, nowhere near as strong, but it's still looking at almost half a dollar within the third year, typically. It's like $0.75 per user. Now, if you look at where we are right now in terms of RCS and also WhatsApp, the ARPU is incredibly low. So the indication's already there that getting these off the ground, getting these into brands, getting brands using these is not going to be a quick overnight success. It is going to take time. And we're already starting to see that there's probably going to be a 4 or 5 year window where, for example, in RCS, something is rolled out, and when about 4 or 5 years until there starts to become meaningful revenue generation. So it's more about being patient, because as a wizened person said to me on the phone call last week, we can get to Mars. We have the technology to get to Mars, we just can't do much there. And that's kind of, I think, where we are, not just with RCS, but with all rich messaging. We have the technology now, we just need to understand how we use it. So how we educate brands, how we educate customers and end users. There's a lot of work to be done. It's going to be a slow process, but, and here's the key point, it can be a massive, massive opportunity. So if we look at what's happened over the last 15 years or so, so the rise of a mobile industry, this is the mobile advertising sector. So it's gone from about 0 around 2005, and right now, at the end of 2020, according to Zenith Optimedia, it was worth about $200 billion. So this is what can happen when things grow and you actually think about the number of mobile users out there. The same is going to be true for rich messaging. So in terms of where we think rich messaging is in terms of the mobile advertising journey, we'd say about March in the first year. So again, it's really early days, so we do really need to be patient. So these are figures we got from Statista that show the size of the app industry. And again, it says that by 2023, again, based on this 15-year period between 2008, the launch of Apple's App Store, and 2023, they believe, so not our figures, that the app market will be worth around $935 billion. So it's fast, absolutely fast. There are obviously some very varied forecasts here. There are some forecasts that say it could be 150 billion, some say about 500, but we went for 935 billion because I'm trying to prove a point. So that point really is the fact that we need to start thinking about rich messaging as part of the whole mobile ecosystem and not just a small part of SMS. Because obviously what we're doing is going from A2P SMS as largely a one-way analog unilateral service to something that is rich and conversational. So if we then put this into perspective, we've got A2P SMS, which is at $21 billion. You've got the customer care world, which is over $1 trillion. There, as I said, we've got mobile advertising at 200 billion. And we've got the mobile apps, which is close to $1 trillion. Now, these three areas will potentially feed the messaging ecosystem. And I do have issues saying tributaries. This is Gav's fault, not mine. He pointed out the way I said it is wrong, and now I can't say it at all. So let's look at where we are then. So this is our journey of messaging. So we're here. We've come down from the source. A2P SMS is here. We're beyond the stream now. We're at a small river as we look at this analogy of a river flowing into the sea. So the market's worth about $21.5 billion. This is our opportunity. And this is the messaging river of spend. Some might say it's quite a cheesy way of looking at things. That's your opinion. But I think the key point here is that this is, if things stayed the same, A2P SMS spend, there would be growth over this period of time. We do think it will continue to grow because right now it is a very safe, secure, trusted and tried and used channel by businesses. So it's not going away anytime soon. Now you've got all of these other areas feeding into this marketplace that will kind of, each time something else happens, it will layer on top of it. There'll be more spend. So obviously we've got A2P SMS. Now we've got rich messaging. So we've got RCS, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. All of these are coming on to spend. Then you've got to think about, are there just 2.23% of businesses spending money on messaging, in which case the market itself we hardly touched. And if you think, actually, one thing that we will be releasing very soon are our CPaaS forecasts. In fact, CPaaS is probably one of the best ways of reaching all of these businesses. Because if you can tap into the fact that, for example, they all have operating software on a laptop, on their phone, you can link that. There's a way of actually accessing as many companies as possible that want to use a CPaaS platform to communicate with their customers. Again, not every company will need to do that. Not what we're saying. We're saying that we haven't even really started selling this channel to the majority of businesses. So then you've obviously got, Praddy mentioned 5G. That's obviously going to have a massive impact on what we use messaging for, what we can send over it. Then you've got the migration of things that touched on in terms of the ad spend, app spend. Then you've got other kind of innovative use cases emerging that we just aren't aware of. You've got elements such as contextual marketing. And then of course we've got the unknown. And there's going to be endless unknowns coming that have really kind of helped propel this market forward. So here's the big finale, and here's the massive caveat. So this is more of a statement, it's not a forecast, okay? But when you start to bring all of these elements together, you can actually think that in theory, just looking at the world from an A2P SMS and projecting that forward doesn't truly reflect or accurately reflect what's going to happen over the next 10, 15 years. So here, for example, all we've done is to apply the Facebook ARPU of around $30 to a 4 billion user base of smartphone users. And that in itself gives us revenues of around $123 billion. And again, we're not saying when this will happen, but this is what we believe will happen. And based on what we've seen with the other channels, in terms of mobile advertising, in terms of app spend, once brands get it, they will throw money at it. So I can't confidently say this. Within 15 years, we believe that rich messaging will be worth in excess of $250 billion. All the facts are there. It's just bringing it all together. The key then is how do we unlock that potential? Because the potential is there, and that is what we think is the key point coming from this presentation today. Is that as an industry, now we've got to start thinking bigger. And that's it. You heard it here first. Thanks all. Hope you appreciated that. That's me done.
Nick, thank you very much for your insights. We have a question from the audience. Wakas Ramzan would like to know, from your perspective, Mobilesquared's perspective, will Google's authenticator affect the A2P SMS market? So what they're doing impact volumes globally?
Yeah.
Do you think?
It will, by what? I don't know. That's what we're looking at now. So, like I said at the start, we're looking at all areas of business messaging right now. So we're covering every angle that we possibly can. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's only positive. And it's just really, just kind of using the imagination to kind of think, actually, how large an opportunity is this? So will Google impact the authenticator affect HTTP? Most definitely. How? Can't tell you that, but that's what we're working on. So we'll start to release things in the next week and months, and then we'll have a really, I think, accurate view of where the market is and where it's going.
I think for me, your river diagram there with all the tributaries flowing into it, that was a very impactful, shall I say. It wasn't cheesy in the least. It really wasn't, because you just think of the Amazon, you think of what flows into that and what creates that. And business messaging is that. It's made up of so many channels. Now, a question to you, a personal question to you. I remember 5 years ago, 4 years ago, even 3 or 2 years ago, being able to, can you imagine, being able to physically meet someone at a conference? I can't wait for those days to come back again. But meeting people who are saying, oh, SMS is on its way out, SMS is dead. And I'm talking about business to consumer, B2B SMS, A2P SMS, as we call it in the industry. When was the last time you personally heard someone say, oh, I think A2P SMS is on its way out, it's going to be replaced next year by something?
Never heard someone say it'll be replaced next year, but even in, it has been mentioned in our research calls so far in the last couple of months. So that view's still out there, but the view is obviously based on the fact that a lot of companies still focus on what's happening in the P2P space and the impact that OTT is having. As we're seeing, the take-up of all things rich business messaging is far slower than anyone really envisaged. Yeah. So in terms of what that means, in terms of understanding the kind of the RCS landscape, what's happening with all the developments in the last 6 months, ultimately that will kind of work its way to a conclusion, and everything will find a resolution one way or another. But companies need to go somewhere, they need to communicate. And right now, messaging is the one that seems to be hit. Emails, again, I've only heard this from a friend who's in the email marketing, but email's struggling now. And companies realise that maybe they do have to spend a slight premium on using SMS, but the message gets across, it gets there. And that's the key thing. If you think about the urgency that brands, for example, supermarkets have experienced in the last year, trying to tell their customers, given that that could be one of the only places that they can go in lockdown to do their weekly shop because you can't get online, and they've got to say how safe is it to go? These are the guidelines. This is what you need to do. These are the instructions we ask you to follow. Wear a mask, blah blah blah. And it's urgent. You can't just have that sitting on an email, hoping that someone will read it. Get it in the hand as a message, and it will be read. Brands and businesses get that. They get that it's 160 characters. It's not fancy. I think this is the problem. We're going from something that's really functional and pragmatic to something that's conversational, rich, creative, and it takes preparation. It doesn't take long to put a short message together. Here's a discount code. Here's a URL click, and you're opt out. Obviously, but can't forget that. But it's where we are, and hardly any businesses are actually using messaging. If you think in terms of the size of the advertising world, $600 billion, you've got lots of small businesses that are putting little ads somewhere, or they're using local versions of Facebook or Google to promote their service. They start using messaging. You get into that long tail of whatever it was, 260, 70 million companies, the organic growth is there, it's just reaching it.
I know, I think for me, that was just so mind-blowing. I've been in the business messaging area for 20 years myself, but that figure you were saying, where you're thinking, just look, if we assume just 10% of businesses out there in the world, and we're talking whether it be a one-person organization like Walmart employing 2.2 million people, or anywhere in between, that 90% of those businesses out there still are not truly using business messaging and haven't really moved beyond email. That is some fearsome growth to come. Absolutely.
So when we say could be $250 billion, $500 billion opportunity, it's out there. We just need to unlock it. It's as simple as that.
I think some companies are doing a very good job of unlocking that. If you look at the multi-billion-dollar valuations of some business messaging companies, and Paul Ruppert actually has a session about that tomorrow in day 2, focusing on the mergers and acquisition side of things. And we can but say that business messaging has become cool. It absolutely has become cool. And I was talking not so long ago to a messaging company actually based in Dublin, and they've had in the past the difficulty of retaining young staff, because if you look at Dublin, it's the HQ, Europe HQ, you've got Google, you've got Facebook, you've got so many other different companies there.
Yeah.
But I was saying to them, but hang on a second, SMS is now cool. And that feeds, as we saw, it's the initial little stream flowing into this business messaging behemoth river. So there's plenty of potential for growth. Now we have some questions, Nick, coming in. And
we know how to
coming in. So Richard Carlson asks, what do you think will the impact of IoT add to business messaging going forward?
Again, we are looking at that. So our forecasts haven't really included that before. We are adding that this year. So again, our numbers are probably only going to get bigger.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're starting to look at that. It's a key area now in terms of our research. And we think it's going to be a key area moving forward.
Now we have Rankothanakari Maringati asks, what kind of threats do you assess weigh heavy on RCS's potential realization? Well, I think what you've said, RCS is becoming real. But what from your research do you see holding it back at the moment? Anything in particular come to light?
It's the same for all of them. There's a lot of rules, regulations, and guidelines that seem to be holding back brand adoption. I mean, in terms of, for example, look at WhatsApp Business. On the API side, if you want to do a push message, you've got a template you've got to follow. You know, that's kind of the model that the operators have applied, something similar, at least in Japan, in RCS, where you're not really allowed to do marketing. It's more a notification. And then you kind of think, well, actually, RCS is primed for something like marketing and promotions. You can get your one-time passwords, your basic notifications via SMS. So again, it's understanding and almost trusting brands, to kind of use the channel in the right way. We're all adults. There will be some rogue activity. It's inevitable. Happens on every channel, but as long as we're on top of it and we can kind of quash it as soon as it happens, that's fine. It's the game. It's the cat and mouse game. It's grey routes, white routes in SMS. So I think that's a key thing. Pricing is going to be key for RCS. I think when does a session start? How long a session is, if that's not a kind of an agreed unified view in the market. I think that will be a big problem, because then you've got to have that difficult conversation as an aggregator to a brand, saying operator A is doing this, operator B is doing this, operator C is doing this, and so on and so forth. That's tricky. But I think the actual biggest thing is patience. That's the key thing. It's not going to happen overnight. It is going to be a slow process, because you've got to move brands from a channel that they don't really think about that much, because they don't need to, into one where they might even have to get their creative agencies on board on this one. They're going to have to get potentially, who designs their app, their website? These guys are going to have to get involved, potentially, start putting their RCS campaign together. So the whole campaign management thing is fundamentally new. You know, who's educating them on doing that? What about chatbots? Do they really understand what a good chatbot is? How it should work for them? You know, so this is a whole new world. This is why I really loved the analogy getting to Mars, because I think that is such the perfect kind of comment in terms of where we are right now. We can get to Mars. We can do it. But we don't know what to do now we're here.
I totally agree with you, Nick, because I think the days of these big broad brush strokes. I remember, and we're both old enough to remember when MMS came out. Remember that? The MMS, and people were talking. So many people were saying SMS is toast. SMS is dead because you've got the vibrancy, the picture, the dynamism of MMS. It's going to kill SMS, and it didn't happen. So I think the approach you're mentioning here, where you're using essentially horses for courses, certain channels for particular use cases, and actually at the end of the day, we've got to be asking our customers. I'm talking about the end user out there. What do you prefer being interfaced with? What's your channel of choice? But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, if you need to get something quick and rapid out there, nothing at the moment in terms of speed and accessing business messaging providers who offer that service matches at the moment SMS. Exactly. For getting that urgent short notification out. And it goes beyond just massive product recalls of whether it be smartphones or whether it be cars. And we've seen definitely in the past year, with the pandemic hitting the world, urgency has become key. So SMS is still very relevant. So thank you for that. Now, on that topic, we have another question. Yogesh Limbani asks you, if you have this, you probably don't, but we can talk about it. What are your forecasts for a percentage share of business messaging when it comes to P2A discovery? Because, of course, business messaging isn't just one-way A to P. You have the P2A element as well. Any numbers, any ideas on that?
We did. I mean, we've checked. If you look at, so SMS is obviously A to P. There's so much. P2A is tiny, so it's hardly even worth registering. It barely registers. RCS, we've always looked at things differently, and we always originally thought it'd be massive in the P2A side. Then we kind of thought, well, actually, there's a lot of issues here. So the A to P model is going to be easier. It's going to be built on its SMS heritage. So at the moment, in terms of where we were at the end of last year, so within, let's say, I'm not going to give years, but let's say years X, Y, Z. So by the time we get to year Z, P2A traffic would account for about 13% of total RCS traffic. That's what we were seeing last year, what we're expecting. Whether that will change, possibly. I mean, we did see the likes of WhatsApp Business and Apple's ABC dominating, and WhatsApp Business in particular on the API side, dominating that, because they're really going after that customer care market. Again, why would you go after A to P SMS at 20 billion when you can go after industries that are enormous? And that's what they're doing, and it makes absolute sense. But now we're starting to see RCS really trying to kind of get in there, and the whole P2A model is probably almost the right way of doing it now, because I realise I'm over time, I'll be really quick. We kind of think that the mindset around RCS has to change. Again, this is kind of just something that we introduced at the last MEF Connects for Business Messaging in October. So having, the A to P model is very telco-centric, and you're basically with a brand, give an aggregator, here's our 1 million mobile numbers on our database. They then do their check. 10% are RCS enabled. You can reach 10%. Brand says, why do I want to reach 10%? But in actual fact, if you start positioning RCS from the P2A side and throw it out to the brands and get the brands to start developing RCS users as followers, to start applying a social media strategy, they'll start using it differently. Because if you think about it, you probably, if you've got 1 million users, you've got 100,000 on RCS, how many followers do you have on Twitter? And yet all brands use Twitter. So again, it's just the mindset. we kind of need to change how we as an industry sell RCS.
Totally agree. Nick, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for your time today. With your industry forecasts, we have so many more questions we unfortunately weren't able to get to. Time has run out. But thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in action and later during the event. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
all the best. Bye.